Amina Johnson was a young, brilliant black woman known for her confidence and sharp mind. Recently promoted to marketing executive at a major corporation, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. After years of dedication and hard work, she finally had a reason to celebrate. For her upcoming business trip, she decided to book a first-class seat. She wanted to experience the comfort and calm that would help her focus and prepare for an important presentation she was scheduled to deliver. The moment she clicked confirm on the flight booking website, a wave of excitement washed over her. This was more than just a flight. It was a symbol of her success. She imagined settling into a plush seat, sipping a glass of champagne, and reviewing her presentation in peace. The long hours she had spent crafting her strategy deserved a quiet moment to shine. On the day of the flight, Amina arrived at the airport early. The sun streamed through the expansive windows of the terminal, casting a warm glow over the bustling crowds. She walked with steady steps toward the check-in counter, dressed professionally and carrying a sleek leather briefcase. The airline staff greeted her with a polite smile as she handed over her ticket. Everything was smooth and routine. Before boarding, Amina spent some time in the exclusive first-class lounge. The space was serene, filled with soft music and comfortable seating. She sipped a hot cup of coffee while reviewing her notes on a tablet. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues congratulating her on the promotion. The positive energy around her matched her own feelings of pride and anticipation. When it was time to board, Amina joined the line of first-class passengers. The cabin was exactly as she had pictured: spacious, quiet, and luxurious. She found her seat by the window and settled in, the soft leather embracing her as she leaned back to relax. The flight attendants smiled warmly as they welcomed her aboard. As the plane began to taxi, Amina opened her laptop and started rehearsing her presentation. The steady hum of the engines provided a soothing background as she refined her slides and notes. Everything was going perfectly, until an announcement over the intercom shattered the calm. Her heart skipped a beat. The airline staff approached her seat and asked her to give it up. They explained that a man with an elite membership status had arrived and needed her first-class seat. Amina felt a sudden jolt of disbelief and confusion. She had paid for the seat, earned it through hard work, and now she was being asked to give it away. Her mind raced. How could this be happening? She looked around, searching for support, but the crew's expression was firm and final. She had a choice: argue and cause a scene, or comply quietly and face the humiliation. Taking a deep breath, Amina nodded, telling herself she would find a way to respond later. She packed up her things and prepared to move to a lower-class seat. Despite the shock, she kept her composure. Inside, a fire had been lit, a determination not to let this moment define her, but to use it as a turning point. The journey was only beginning. Amina gathered her belongings quietly and followed the flight attendant to her new seat in the economy section. The contrast was immediate and jarring. From the spacious luxury of first class to the cramped and noisy economy cabin, the shift was more than physical. It was a sudden reminder of the unfairness she had just endured. The man who had taken her seat, a white man with an elite membership, was already settled comfortably, unaware or indifferent to the disruption his arrival had caused. Though her mind raced with emotions, anger, confusion, and disappointment, Amina refused to let them show. She reminded herself that her response would define the story, not the injustice itself. As she buckled her seatbelt, she quietly began recording the exchange with her phone. The crew had offered only a vague apology, their tone firm and unyielding. There was no real explanation, no offer to make amends beyond the immediate request. Around her, other passengers chatted and read, oblivious to the tension she felt. The hum of the engines and the murmurs of conversation filled the cabin as the plane ascended into the sky. Amina focused on steadying her breath and gathering her thoughts. This moment felt like a test of her strength. She reviewed the video she had captured, the cold professionalism in the crew's voices standing in stark contrast to her calm demeanor. It was clear to her that this was not a simple seat change but a deeper issue rooted in privilege and entitlement. She knew the airline's policies allowed for upgrades and changes based on membership status, But this situation felt different, personal, and discriminatory. Her mind replayed the scenario repeatedly. What could she do? Could she confront the airline? Demand justice? Or would speaking out only bring more hardship? Amina weighed her options carefully. The world often judged black women harshly for speaking up, labeling them as difficult or confrontational. She wanted to be heard without becoming a target. As the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, Amina resolved to act with dignity. She would not let this incident break her spirit. Instead, she would document it, seek accountability, and use her voice to inspire change. The discomfort of her new seat was temporary, but the impact she could make was potentially lasting. When the flight attendants passed by again, she greeted them politely, keeping her frustration under control. Inside, she was planning her next move. One that would demand respect and equality, not just for herself but for others who might face the same injustice. Amina sat quietly in her economy seat, her phone discreetly recording the details of the encounter she had just endured. The soft buzz of the cabin was a sharp contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Every detail mattered. The tone of voice, the words spoken, the subtle dismissiveness that masked a deeper issue. She knew that her calm exterior was her strongest weapon. This was not a moment for loud protests or angry confrontations. Instead, it was a moment for silent strength and careful documentation. Amina understood the power of evidence and the importance of maintaining professionalism, especially as a black woman navigating spaces where her voice could be easily dismissed. Her fingers traced the edges of her notebook, where she began jotting down thoughts and feelings that could not be captured on video. She described the crew's behavior, the reactions of fellow passengers, and her own restrained response. These notes would help her frame the incident clearly when the time came to speak up. The flight stretched on, and Amina used the time to reflect on her career journey. She had worked hard to reach her current position as a marketing executive, breaking barriers in a competitive industry. This incident, though painful, reminded her of the resilience she had cultivated along the way. Her mind also wandered to the countless stories she had heard from friends and colleagues, stories of subtle biases, overt discrimination, and moments when professionalism was tested by prejudice. She realized that her experience was not isolated but part of a broader pattern that demanded change. Throughout the flight, Amina maintained her composure, engaging politely with the crew and fellow passengers. She declined offers to discuss the incident during the flight, choosing instead to preserve her energy for the next steps. Her focus was clear. She would address this issue through the proper channels, ensuring that her voice was heard without creating unnecessary conflict. As the plane began its descent, Amina felt a quiet determination settle over her. The moment of discomfort was passing, but the opportunity to make a difference was just beginning. She was ready to turn this experience into a catalyst for progress. As the wheels of the plane touched down, Amina felt a shift within herself. The sting of humiliation from earlier had not vanished, but it had transformed into something steadier, resolve. She exited the plane calmly, holding her bag close and walking past the first-class section that had been denied to her. No one from the crew made eye contact. In the car to her hotel, Amina watched the city roll by in a blur. Her thoughts were sharp and organized. She replayed the moment she was asked to move seats, the language used, the way no alternative was offered, the assumption that her presence in first class was somehow negotiable, while his was not. She reviewed the video clip, checking its clarity and length. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no crowd reactions, but it revealed everything. A composed woman being forced to accept less, while the man received more without question. Amina considered sharing the video online. She knew the power it could have. It might go viral. Headlines would follow. Social media outrage could force the airline into a public apology. But she also knew the cost. Her face would be everywhere. Debates would erupt. And the message might get lost in noise and argument. She opened her laptop and began typing instead. A letter, thoughtful, precise, directed to the highest office at the airline. She wanted to speak to someone who could do more than apologize, someone who could make changes. She addressed the letter to Isabel Grant, the chief operating officer, a name she had seen in a company profile months ago. Amina explained what had happened in professional but firm language. She attached the video, her notes, and closed with a request: an honest discussion about service equity and accountability. Before hitting send, she read the message again. It was sharp without being emotional, honest without being accusatory. It reflected her experience and values. She clicked send, closed her laptop, and sat back. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about dignity, about being seen and respected. And now the airline would have to respond. The next morning, Amina was in her hotel room when her phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. She answered, her voice steady despite the nerves stirring beneath. "Miss Johnson? This is Isabel Grant." Amina stood up instinctively, surprised that the chief operating officer herself was calling. Isabel's tone was calm and direct. She acknowledged receiving Amina's message in video, thanked her for the clarity and professionalism, and asked if Amina would be available for a call with the airline's senior leadership later that day. Amina agreed. A few hours later, she sat in a quiet conference room at the airline's local office. The call projected on a large screen. Isabel appeared first, composed, sharp-eyed, and respectful. Other executives joined in from different locations. Isabel opened the meeting by addressing the incident plainly. "We are deeply concerned by what happened," she said. "There is no excuse for the decision made by our crew, and we are taking it seriously." Amina listened carefully as Isabel explained that the airline had already launched an internal review. The crew had been questioned. Logs and seat assignments were being re-examined. Amina was invited to share her full account. She recounted the timeline, her conversation with the gate agent, the moment she was asked to move, the lack of explanation, and how the other passenger had been seated with barely a word. She made sure to stay factual, allowing the details to speak for themselves. The room remained quiet when she finished. Then Isabel said, "Miss Johnson, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced, and I want to be transparent with you. This isn't the first complaint we've received regarding elite membership overrides, but it is the most documented and the most respectfully presented." That admission startled Amina. She had suspected a pattern, but hearing it confirmed was sobering. "We'd like to go beyond an apology," Isabel continued. "We need your help. Your voice could guide us in revising our policies. Would you consider meeting with us again soon? Not just to address your case, but to begin a larger conversation." Amina took a breath. The offer was unexpected, but not unwelcome. "I'm open to it," she said, "but only if this conversation leads to real action, not just reputation management." Isabel nodded. Understood. As the call ended, Amina felt the weight of possibility. She had been dismissed once, then heard, and now invited into the process of change. She didn't plan for any of this when she booked her flight, but something meaningful was taking shape, and her voice had become part of it. The following week, Amina received a formal letter from the airline. It confirmed that a complete internal investigation had been conducted. The tone was serious and direct, a sharp contrast to the vague apologies she had received at the airport. The letter detailed that after reviewing flight records, staff interviews, and Amina's video footage, the airline concluded that the downgrade had been unjustified and handled with clear bias. The crew members involved had been dismissed. Amina sat with the letter in her lap, absorbing the weight of that decision. She didn't feel victorious. This wasn't about punishing individuals. It was about a system that allowed such decisions to go unchallenged. But still, she felt that a line had been drawn, a message sent. Later that day, Isabel Grant called again. This time, the tone was less formal. "We've taken your feedback seriously," she said, "and I wanted you to be the first to know. We're moving forward with new training protocols, rewriting service policies, and setting up a review board. You've inspired this." Amina thanked her but kept her thoughts guarded. Inspiration was not enough. Implementation mattered more. Also, Isabel added, "We would like to invite you to participate in this process. We're forming a committee to lead the policy overhaul. It will be diverse, independent, and empowered to hold us accountable. We want your voice on that team. Amina paused. She thought about her long hours building her career, about being the only black woman in many rooms, about staying silent to keep the peace. Now the choice stood in front of her, not to speak about change but to shape it. I'll do it, she said. But I'm not here to decorate your committee. I want impact. Isabel replied. That's exactly why we want you. Word of the investigation's outcome started to spread. While the media caught only pieces, Amina declined all interviews. She didn't post the video. She didn't write a thread. She chose instead to focus on the work ahead, knowing that real change would come through structure, not spectacle. Behind the scenes, meetings began. The committee took shape. Voices from different backgrounds, professions, and communities joined in. Some skeptical, others hopeful. Amina sat at the table not as a symbol but as a force. Her presence reminded everyone that change wasn't a concept. It had a name, a seat, and a voice they could not ignore. The committee meetings were held in a quiet, glass-walled conference room at the airline's corporate headquarters. Amina arrived early for the first session, dressed in a soft gray suit that matched her calm but commanding presence. Around the table sat lawyers, diversity consultants, HR executives, a union representative, and 2 former passengers who had submitted formal complaints in the past. Each person came with a story. Amina came with a mission. She introduced herself simply, stating, I'm not here for appearances. I'm here for accountability. The first few meetings were difficult. Many of the executives struggled with defensiveness, using corporate jargon to dodge hard truths. Amina didn't raise her voice, but her words cut clean through the fog of excuses. When you ignore bias, she told them, you authorize it. As the weeks passed, her influence became undeniable. She proposed a transparent incident reporting system that bypassed gatekeeping. She advocated for mandatory implicit bias training for all crew members, not just supervisors. She challenged the language used in internal policy, demanding clarity and precision, because ambiguity left too much room for discretion. And discretion, as she knew firsthand, could too easily become discrimination. Isabel remained supportive. She sat beside Amina in most meetings, not to lead, but to listen. She gave Amina space to push, and she made sure those in power heard her. Outside the boardroom, Amina kept working at her regular job. She still managed campaigns, met with clients, and pitched ideas. But the committee work added a new weight to her schedule, and to her heart. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered why she had to be the one to fix what others broke. But every time doubt crept in, she thought of that day on the plane. The quiet humiliation, the forced smile, the camera in her hand. The choice she made not to shout but to show. Not to burn bridges but to build new ones. And so she stayed the course. In one meeting, a junior analyst presented a revised set of guidelines for passenger service protocol. Amina scanned the document, her eyes pausing at the last page. There, printed in plain type, was a new commitment. No passenger would ever be asked to give up a seat based on membership status alone, especially if the action disregarded prior booking and payment. Amina looked around the table and nodded. This is a start. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And something was more than what had been. The invitation to speak at the Global Service Equity Conference arrived 2 weeks later. Amina stared at the email on her laptop screen, rereading the words as if they might change with time. The keynote slot had opened unexpectedly. They wanted her. She felt the weight of it immediately. This wasn't just a panel discussion or a quiet boardroom chat. This was a stage, lights, cameras, hundreds of attendees, and countless more watching online. And she wasn't just being asked to speak as a passenger. She was being asked to represent something bigger. For days, she couldn't write a single line. Each time she sat at her desk with a blank page, memories flooded back. The feel of the boarding pass in her hand, the pitying look from the flight attendant, the tight silence as she walked past the first-class cabin. But slowly, deliberately, her words began to form. She wrote about dignity, about the invisible lines people draw between who deserves comfort and who does not. She wrote about her grandmother, who never flew in a plane but taught her that silence could be stronger than shouting. She wrote about the difference between compliance and acceptance, between service and respect. Late into the night, Amina practiced the speech aloud in her living room, pacing softly over the rug, adjusting tone and rhythm with each pass. Her friend Marcus came by to listen and offer feedback. He leaned on the doorway, arms crossed, eyes wet. "You're not just telling your story," he said. "You're giving people a mirror." Amina nodded. That was the goal. Not to shame, not to scold, but to reflect. The week of the conference, she flew out to Chicago, this time seated comfortably in first class. A small detail, but one that reminded her of the distance she had traveled. Not just in miles, but in meaning. In the green room before her speech, Amina adjusted her blazer and looked at her reflection. Calm eyes, steady breath, shoulders strong. The conference hall was vast, filled with professionals, executives, students, and activists. A spotlight fell on the stage as her name was announced. Amina walked forward slowly, with no notes in her hand, just her truth. The microphone hummed softly. The room quieted. She began. Amina stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on its edges. For a brief moment, she looked out at the crowd. Rows of unfamiliar faces, waiting, curious, expectant. She took a breath, steady and deep, then began. "I did not come here today to talk about outrage," she said, her voice clear. "I came to talk about dignity." Her words landed like calm ripples on still water. She spoke not just of the flight, but of every quiet injustice people chose not to name. She spoke of professionalism and restraint, of being underestimated, of watching others walk into rooms never questioned, while she had to prove herself twice over, every time. "And when that moment came, when I was asked to leave the seat I had rightfully booked, I could have shouted," she continued. "But instead, I chose to document, to speak through the systems that too often remain silent. Because change is not just noise. Change is sustained, patient pressure." There were nods across the crowd, some silent, some subtle. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. A man near the back lowered his phone, choosing to listen without distraction. Amina didn't deliver anger. She delivered clarity. She told them how the airline had responded, not perfectly, but sincerely. She spoke about Isabel Grant, the committee, and the work that still lay ahead. She emphasized that policies mattered, but hearts mattered more. Training could shape behavior, but only empathy could reshape mindset. "Our goal isn't to punish," she said. "It's to prevent. And prevention begins with presence, with listening, with acknowledgement." When her final words settled into the air, the silence that followed was not hesitation. It was reflection. Then came the applause, loud and rising, not from obligation but from resonance. They were not just clapping for her. They were clapping for the idea that civility could be powerful, that professionalism did not mean submission, and that grace under pressure could inspire action. Backstage, several attendees waited to speak with her. A young woman from a non-profit organization, an older man who had once held a senior role in a major airline. Each offered thanks, questions, invitations. Amina received them all with the same composed warmth. Later, in her hotel room, she sank into the bed, heels off, speech notes tucked away. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew this was more than a moment. It was a movement she had stepped into, one foot at a time, and she wasn't stepping back. Amina returned home with a suitcase full of business cards, notes, and handwritten messages from people she had moved. The conference had marked a turning point, not just for her, but for the broader conversation around equity in customer service. Yet amid the praise and attention, Amina remained grounded. She knew that real change did not happen overnight. It happened through structure, through accountability, and through relentless follow-through. The airline's committee held its first official meeting just a week later. Amina sat at the long glass table with executives, HR leads, and flight attendants from around the country. Her presence was no token gesture. She spoke with clarity, challenging the assumptions that had long gone unchecked. "What we need," she said, "is a service culture that sees people before status. A company that asks not just what happened, but why it happened. and how we stop it from happening again. Proposals were drawn up. Training programs were redesigned. New reporting systems were introduced. Staff across all levels would be required to complete modules addressing unconscious bias and inclusive service. Every policy would be evaluated not only for efficiency but for fairness. Outside the corporate world, Amina's story had reached quiet corners. Her decision not to share the flight video, to seek dialogue instead of outrage, had been noticed. A journalist from a national business magazine interviewed her. A graduate student emailed, asking if she could use Amina's experience as a case study for her thesis on ethical leadership. Despite the growing attention, Amina refused to center herself. She redirected every spotlight toward the mission. Her days became a balancing act between corporate meetings, speaking engagements, and her original role in marketing. She worked longer hours but felt a deeper sense of purpose than ever before. One evening, as she prepared slides for a keynote at a leadership summit, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Isabel. Update. Our new policy handbook passed board approval. Your committee's work is making real waves. Thank you again. Amina smiled. Not because she sought validation, but because she knew that each policy shift, each changed mind, each flight attendant who paused to reconsider a choice, that was progress. As spring turned to summer, her impact continued to unfold, not in headlines, but in the quiet, consistent improvements happening behind closed doors, in terminals and meeting rooms alike. And while she still flew for business, Amina never requested first class again. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because she understood now, more than ever, that where she sat didn't define her power. Her voice did,